Hey there, Wild One. Welcome back to Wildly Intentional. This episode is part of Into the Known, a series where we rediscover the rhythms, stories, and ancestral wisdom that can ground us today. Because sometimes the answers we're searching for have already been spoken. And today, we're going deep. I'm sitting down with someone who's not just a guest. He's a part of my story. We first connected years ago through this land, Eureka Moon Farm, working side by side on the early stages of our homestead. And now we work together on the nonprofit that he founded, Earthmind, a mission-driven organization rooted in ecological healing, regenerative design, and rethinking our relationship with the planet. He's a mentor of mine, a good friend, and a local legend. If Morgan Freeman ever decided to study permaculture, read oral tradition by firelight, and quietly become the soul of a movement, you've got my guest for today, Fred Meyer. We're talking storylines and bloodlines. This episode explores what's been passed down intentionally or not, and how those forgotten or buried stories hold practical wisdom for us today. Fred and I are both sitting here holding something very rare, our family's histories, written down across generations. Most people don't even know their great-grandparents' names, let alone have family documents going back to the 1800s. Today, we're opening these pages. We're reflecting on what these stories can still teach us, and we're pulling back the curtain on what those documents are saying and revealing about the patterns, resilience, and legacy. Let's dive into what we're holding. Real lineage, real stories, and real reflections. Reclaim your rhythm. Rethink the rules. Rewrite your life. This is Wildly Intentional, the show where we question the scripts we've inherited and build a life, family, and legacy on purpose. If you're done living on autopilot, come with a curious mind and a courageous heart. Here, we talk about what it means to question, unlearn, create, and build what truly matters. I'm your host, Mandy, maverick mom of three, maker, family culture builder, lifelong question asker, and the friend people call when they're ready to rethink, well, everything. I'm here to shake the norms, tell the truth, and light the way forward. All right, Fred, well, let's get started here. Would you mind sharing a bit about your family's history? What were some of the most meaningful things? I see your book in front of you all tabbed up. So I'm just curious, what were some of the most meaningful things that stood out to you when reviewing this document?
Sure, Mandy. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I am really honored to be here. That was quite the introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to that.
You already have.
Yeah, so you have your memoirs in your hand
Thank
as
you.
well, and they look very similar. Mine's a little spiral-bound book, and my great-grandmother, Uvena-Pidgeon, she had a bunch of little black notebooks that she just wrote down her memoirs in, and then one of her daughters, my great-aunt, actually took those memoirs and typed them up into this book and put them in sequence. And so that's what is in my hands today. I'm so deeply grateful that my family did this because my great-grandmother died when I was 19 years old. And I was 19 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know the value of her wisdom at that time. And so I'm really holding it now in my hands, and I'm just really grateful for it.
That's awesome, Fred.
Yeah.
What day does it go back to, or what year is it from?
It starts with her childhood. So most of the memoirs are about her childhood and then when she got married and then moved here to Iowa, and it ends right around the Iowa time frame. And so it's mostly a document of the first half of her life out in Oregon in the West, and then how difficult that was. And then when she moved here to Iowa, things got much easier. It kind of stops there because it was written for her children more than her. Her children kept asking her to write these things down. And so they knew the story mostly when they got here to Iowa because they were old enough to have those memories.
That's amazing. Would you share something from one of the pages?
Yeah, I can. It starts out, and the title is Mountain Born. I was born on June 6th, 1893, in Jackson County, Oregon, over a mountain range from our house at Squaw Lakes at my Aunt Helen Thurman's home on Yale Creek, a tributary of Little Applegate River. Daddy came after us when I was about 2 weeks old. He rode one horse carrying my little half-brother Fred in front of him. Mother rode other horse, holding me in her arms, getting home late in the afternoon, all tired from long ride and glad to get home. That's how it starts.
Were you named after that Fred?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
That's so cool, though.
Yeah. So what I find interesting is this is probably a 78-year-old woman reflecting on her memories of being out there as a child. And I read into the story now, trying to see the little bits and pieces of things that they just normalized. So when she was born, her father wasn't around. He was actually a miner. He was probably out mining. And 2 weeks passed, and then he came and, quote, got them, right? I'm just reading that, and I'm thinking, that was the norm back then? How odd. And it is, all of her stories are riddled with things like that. I'm like, what is going on between the lines? What was really going on back then? Just so different than
what year
how
is
we live
this?
Now. This was 1893.
Oh, man.
So right at the turn of 1900.
Just as a mom hearing that, right? Being like, okay, so deliver by myself and then be postpartum with an infant by myself for 2 weeks. And I know there's single moms that are doing that. Kudos.
Yeah.
That is hard work.
Yeah.
That is so hard.
So much respect for it. Yeah,
absolutely.
So the rest of the book is about from there. She talks about her childhood, growing up in Southern Oregon, and then just progresses to when she got married at 16 years old and the hardships she experienced shortly after that when they started a farm. And then they moved here to Iowa. So I can read about some of those stories.
So this is all her life specifically.
It's her life specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
And her name one more time?
Uvena Pidgeon.
Uvena.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you're just really diving deep on all things Uvena.
Right.
And life as she knew it. So is it very like Laura Ingalls Wilder style then?
It is. And what was odd, Mandy, is you introduced me to the Laura Ingalls Wilder story. And I read that. I thought, I got to read these memoirs again. And I got things confused. I was like, wait a minute, what happened with Laura Ingalls Wilder and my grandmother? Because there's so many similarities. They grew up in a prairie-like area. And so there's a lot of similarity.
Yeah, Laura Ingalls is absolutely incredible. And it was us, I'm reading the third book out loud to the kids right now. And reading that, I remembered my aunt had given me this copy. And I was like, I wonder what ancestors were around, like when Laura Ingalls was describing this, if I could find it. And then I started to dive into the stories and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so I've just been reading things out of this to the kids and just, that's been fascinating. But mine's a little different because it's the whole Rohret family line. So it talks about Wolfgang Rohret and him and his journey here and all of his kin and all of their family lines. And it's many, many names in the Johnson County area. And it just talks about all of them and then just like family, things that we are known for, things that should be noted about the family. Like it's not from one perspective, but it is all compiled by a man in my family, Leonard C. Rohret. And so this is on my dad's paternal grandmother was a Rohret.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so your story is more a documentation of your family.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the family lineage from Bavaria.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you want to read something from yours?
Well, this was compiled in 1964 by Leonard Rohret. And I just think, so this is all typed up on a typewriter. Like,
mine too.
Yeah. And like that in itself, there's people probably going to be listening to this. What's a typewriter? And I just think if you've never watched or listened to somebody typewrite and frantically need whiteout, there's just a piece of your childhood missing because the typewriters were, I don't remember ever typing on one. I never learned how to do that because computers were introduced. So I learned keyboarding on an actual computer, but You've probably used a typewriter.
I have used a typewriter. Yeah, that was one of the classes in high school that we took.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had computers as well, but how I learned how to type was on a typewriter. It's funny that you mentioned that. When I was young, I remember my grandmother, who was Uvena's daughter. Her name was Elsie. She died, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I miss her terribly. But I have this one memory of her. We were sitting in the kitchen. She had her typewriter out, and she was typing. I was just watching her fingers, and I just looked at her and said, "How do you know where to put your fingers?" And she just looked at me and kept typing and smiled. I'll never forget that. Yeah.
That's adorable. I'm also impressed that just like I saw no whiteout in this entire memoir. And just
Wow.
like with the vocabulary used and the length of the document, I was like, that in itself feels like an incredible feat. But I just, to your point, feel really grateful to have this then shared with me. And just that like in 1964, Leonard felt so compelled. And that's just when he put his timestamp on this. This probably took him years to
Yeah.
compile and figure out because he's very thorough in it. But yeah, I guess I'll just stop talking about it and actually read one. What was really fun for me was seeing that they were like big part of settling this area and reading Laura Ingalls Wilder to my kids and realizing that my ancestors did that for the county and the city and the town that we live in was really cool. So it says, it is doubtful if any of us realize the tremendous part that the family played in the winning of the West. The modesty of the participants has prevented the telling of their feats and exploits, even to the children, and it has been in no small measure that we are indebted to outsiders for much of the information and stories of the early days. While all of the Rohrets are inveterate storytellers, they all loathe to tell of their own adventures. In doing the research work at the Newberry Library in Chicago and the Iowa State Historical Library at Iowa City, it was found that much historical space has been devoted to people who came to Johnson County a generation or so after the Rohrets. But these newcomers, through the judicial use of self-advertising, have had their names perpetrated, while the real trailbreakers receive scant mention and obscurity. The Rohrets need to be greatly concerned over that fact, as it only proves most conclusively their honesty of purpose, their strength of character, their stubborn and wholesome pride, and their indomitable will to succeed. They have not sought the plaudits of the multitude, but worked purely for the personal satisfaction of accomplishment.
And it sounds like they were very humble as well.
Yes.
They were just doing what was in their blood.
I love his vocabulary. We don't talk like this
No,
anymore.
we do not.
So he mentions this a handful of times about the settling of the West. The foregoing is only a brief outline of some of the highlights, for volumes could be written of the real romance of the part the Rohrets played in the settling of the West. A volume or two could be devoted to nothing else but interesting stories of the pioneer days. For those who are interested, I would suggest the reading of The History of Johnson County from 1836 to 1882. They will be well repaid by discovering just how much of interest has happened in the county. The locations referred to in this history are so well described that there should not be at least a bit of difficulty in finding and identifying all the spots mentioned.
Nice.
Do you want to go on a scavenger hunt?
I so do. And I love looking
Same.
at old photos and trying to determine what has changed and what's
Yeah.
the same. And it's interesting too, when my great-grandmother describes places, she talks about the mountain ranges and the rivers and not necessarily the roads that they were on or how you get there, right? It was more description of the land, what was on the land. And I imagine that's what he was talking about as well.
Yeah.
They provided such detailed description about what the area was like. It didn't take a road, right? They didn't say, go down Eureka Road, right? They said, take a left at this great big cottonwood or go along, follow this river along a valley or something like that.
Right. It's funny you bring up a road, Fred, because if you've ever taken Highway 1 from Iowa City to Dubuque, they talk about they helped to make that.
Wow.
That road's called Dillon's Furrow. And it says the highways of those early days were only game and Indian trails, and many new settlers were being lost on the prairie. The settlers, feeling the need for well-defined roads, decided that one should be laid out to Bloomington, which is now considered Muscatine, and another to Dubuque. Lyman Dillon was engaged to lay out the road to Dubuque and mark it with a plowed furrow. Lyman engaged the 2 Rohret boys to help him with the project. From what we have learned, they started with 5 yoke of oxen and a breaking plow to plow this furrow 100 miles long. State Road 261 from Iowa City to Anamosa and U.S. Highway 151 from Anamosa to Dubuque originally followed this furrow. While the road has been graded and many of the curves have been eliminated, you will notice as you drive along that road keeps to the top of the ridges, which in the early days provided the driest road and avoided the pitfalls of swamps and quicksand. There are several canards about this being a military road, but it was not laid out as such. It was laid out from the pioneer necessity. There were no soldiers at Dubuque at this time, as they had been withdrawn on June 1st of 1833. If a military road had been desired, one of Rock Island would have been more logical. Or perhaps one to one of the still existent military posts farther down the Mississippi. So it goes on to talk about the whole building of that road, following him, and then to prove that they did it, they went to the recorder to say that they were beside Dylan Lyman. But again, to your point of being humble, Dylan's furrow.
It's incredible that they said, I think we'll go ahead and just take this plow through the prairie and go 100 miles to make a new road so folks don't get lost. And they did it.
Yes.
Our ancestors were made of some sturdy stock.
Yes.
And I know that road really well. I grew up in Anamosa.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he mentioned it goes along the ridge lines, it does indeed.
Yes.
Especially as you get closer to Anamosa, which is in the valley of the Wapsipinicon River.
Yes.
And so as you get closer and closer to Anamosa, it just weaves and turns and goes here and there because of that. Yeah, at least Old Highway 1.
Yeah. And it's just incredible, the stuff they talk about, and even just being a part of the building of the old Capitol building at Iowa City. They were just really integral to Johnson County.
Really? They had a hand in building an old Capitol?
Wolfgang, George, Adam, Peter, and Jacob Rohret all seem to have had a hand in the building of the old Capitol at Iowa City. The building was started in July of 1839 and continued for 15 years, but was never finished. The West Porticio was completed in 1938. It probably happened that during the slack season on the farm, they brought their teams to town and arranged to haul material used in construction. When not teaming, they whipsawed lumber, which went into the building.
Wow. What a history.
Right? It's been fun, going through this and just then driving around town and being you guys, great, 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 great grandparents helped with that.
Wow. Amazing.
Wild. Tell us more about
Uvena?
Uvena. Yes. Tell us more about Uvena.
Yeah. One of the things that, as you know about me, I love being out in the wilderness, practicing ancestral skills, and foraging was one of the things that got me really interested in that. So one of the passages that I found really interesting was this one. So she talks about flora and fauna and good stuff to eat. Can't tell names of all, for I don't remember. She talks about the state flower and how it had yellow blossoms shaped like small grapes. The Oregon grape, late in fall, forms clusters of tiny blueberries like a bunch of grapes, but not good to eat. I've had an Oregon grape, and she's right. They're edible, but they're just not good to eat. And so she talks about all these plants that she said she didn't really know, but then she mentions a serviceberry and how beautiful it was and how tall it grew. And she talks about the big, dark, blue, juicy berries in the late summer. Then she talks about there was a live oak. It's more like a tall shrub, stayed green all year. Wild gooseberries, currants, and many more shrubs and brush. The white oak, red oak, black oak, hemlock, Douglas fir, white fir, and other fir. And then she goes on to name all of these plants that she was familiar with. And throughout the whole story of her childhood, she talks about eating, foraging for food, and how they would collect thimbleberries or currants, just bucketfuls of them. That's how they got a lot of their food. And that's how she knew about all of those plants. So just we've heard the story about how our generation knows far more commercialized restaurants, and then logos of restaurants recognizes those than they do native plants or edible plants. And this is why our current generations just didn't grow up embedded in the forest like she did.
Right.
And so she is really familiar with all those plants.
So are you.
I am.
That apple did not fall far from the tree.
Yeah, and this is something that when I think about who I am and I look at how I act in the world and how I view the world, I'm very different from a lot of my family members. They don't spend tons of time in the forest. They don't go foraging. They don't go out and try to start little fires in the woods using ancestral skills. They're gardeners. A lot of my history is from farming, but I've always scratched my head. Why am I so different? And a while back, I ran across the study of epigenetics. And we're all handed down the same genetics, but epigenetics proposes that some things, some traits that we have get highlighted more than others. And it's kind of like a musician might really emphasize a note that they really like. That's kind of for genetics. But I like to think of it more like a landscape. Mandy, I've been in hundreds of landscapes helping people create these more ecological landscapes that work for not just the environment, for us as well. And whenever I enter a landscape, I can see what is highlighted. And that's what I think epigenetics is. So as you scan across all the landscapes in Iowa or the Midwest, they all are the same. They receive mostly the same climate. They all have the same climates, receive the same amount of rain. But landscapes are significantly different. One landscape may be really manicured and orderly. Another may be wildy. Somebody may want to grow food, whether that's fruit trees, berry bushes, or vegetable gardens. Other people may say, no, I want to focus on education. Like I know you have a large playscape in your landscape. So they highlight different things in the landscape. And that's kind of what epigenetics, I think, is. So our ancestors, if we think of it like a landscape, there's paths, well-worn paths in the landscapes of our ancestors. We have a choice as to whether we travel down those paths or go down a different path. And so I tended to gravitate toward the path of foraging, toward the path of wanting to climb mountains and be up high. I wanted to be really close to nature. And also embedded in these stories of my great-grandmother, I realized was a lot of perseverance, a lot of persistence, a lot of work hardness. All of my ancestors, including my current family, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, my brother, they all have this trait of just being really hard workers and persevering. And you can see that reflected in our landscapes as well. My sister, for example, she loves an orderly landscape. I'm the same way. But then when it comes to letting wildness in, she doesn't really like that. She likes everything just so. And I kind of let the wildness in. But we do both love order and structure. Everything kind of in its place. And so she's chosen to water those seeds that promote or order and structure, neat and tidiness. I tend to water the seeds in my epigenetic makeup that express traits of wildness and being more okay with letting those edges be much softer and more wild.
I love that. As you're describing this, Fred, I'm like, there's a picture in here that I didn't tag because now that you're describing this, I'm like, you're really like one person that would absolutely appreciate this. But like, this is the standard layout for how they would set up a homestead back in the day.
Oh, look at that.
Can you describe it? Because they can't see it.
Yeah.
Like just what stands out to you? Or?
So it says sketch of a cabin and barnyard of Wolfgang Rohret.
Rohret.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Let me start that over again. It says sketch of a cabin and barnyard of Wolfgang Rohret.
Yes.
And then it looks like a cabin, the main cabin, and it says there should be approximately 100 feet to a smokehouse and about 100 feet to a well. And it's got approximately 110 feet to a sheep shed and a granary and a hen house. And then off in the distance, this is where the barn and the hog pen go. And it's got just standard measurements for each one of these.
The smile on your face is incredible right now. I love this.
This is great.
So it makes you giddy because you're a landscape architect by trade, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. And a landscape designer. And so there are patterns that every landscape designer, every landscape architect follows. And that is a pattern that they were following. They're saying, if you're going to have a well, make sure it's within 100 feet of your house.
Yeah.
Of course, right? It makes sense. If you're going to have a hog pen, get that a little bit further away.
Right. Keep it away from the backyard. Yeah. I thought this was pretty cool. And just the cottonwood trees, the elm tree, the oak, just the standards that you would have. And to what you said too, the gooseberries and the grape arbor. And like on my parents' property, which is on my mom's side of the family, yeah, they have a grapevine there that's over 150 years old.
Wow.
And they put out the best grapes.
Yeah.
Like the kids and I love to go there and harvest the grapes. Some of these staples that they planted are continuing to bless our generations and like will continue to be there until, I don't know, we greedily tear things down to keep making development. Like, really,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Tearing down the legacy of what our ancestors left us.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is honestly part of the fight my parents are going through right now. Like, development is knocking on their door.
Sure. Yeah. And we know how developing knocks with dollar bills. Yeah. It's
But
hard to resist.
you can't put a price on a century farm. Like, their goal is that that becomes a heritage farm. There's things that matter more than like a price per acre. And to them, it's this preserving the fight that these people went through to come and make Johnson County what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important.
Yeah. That's getting to your values.
Yes.
Which is right and wrong. So, yeah. The morals of your, it's just getting to the morals of your family.
I don't know that that side has documented it in this way. I would love to find it. But yeah, I don't know. I want to jump into this story, Fred, because it's hilarious. And it, you talking about like you and the foraging and the being out in the forest. You know that I am a little bit more farmy, right? We're sitting here at my farm right now and I love chickens. And this is a story that I found about chickens. So he writes, there's an amusing story told upon Mrs. Shellhorn, which we will include. It seems that the Shellhorns decided to put a few berries into a jug of whiskey to soak and to give it an added flavor. After the whiskey was gone, the berries were thrown out into the yard, where the chickens promptly found and ate them. Shortly afterwards, Mrs. Shellhorn noticed the dead chickens, and not wanting to waste the feathers which could be used in a feather bed, she promptly picked the chickens and threw the remains over the fence. You can imagine her surprise when she looked out a little later to find a yard full of naked chickens.
So the chickens were just drunk?
Yes! They were drunk and passed out. And she thought, well, I can't let them go to waste. That would be a really comfortable bed. Yeah, so they were drunk chickens. And she's just thinking, I can't waste all those feathers. That would be a really comfortable bed. So, like, I think that speaks to the frugality of a lot of our ancestors, too, is, oh my God, I'm not going to do that. Pluck, 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 throw, and then naked chickens. Like, I just can't even imagine, like, drinking my morning coffee and seeing my whole flock that I thought was dead. Like, plucking around. What's up today? The chickens didn't miss a beat.
That's great. That's great.
It was interesting. Yeah. So I thought that was funny.
It's also a peek into reading between the lines again. Like you say, nothing went to waste, right? There is every single, including their time. And so, yeah, wanting to be really efficient about things, she just got right after it and plucked those chickens.
Yeah. So going to that point, right, with frugality, and I think it's just like right now, Fred, everything is so influencer focused, where, listen to this. It was on the 11th day of November that they walked slowly up to the Old Man's Creek bottoms. The trees were bare and the ground was covered with 3 feet of snow, but even this could not hide the natural beauty and fertility of the spot. Wolfgang asked his wife, "What do you think of this place?" Apparently, she had an extremely practical mind, for after looking the place over, she replied, "Well, there's wood and there's water, and where there is wood and water, we can always get along."
Yeah, so she knew about how to take that wood and make it into something useful.
Yeah. Like, you need 2 things, wood and water.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, you don't need all the latest gadgets. You don't need 100 of this or that. You don't need to be buying impulsively. You just really need wood and water, and you can get along.
Yeah, yeah. And that speaks also to their skills.
Yes.
Well,
their skills, but also their happiness.
Sure.
Right? It doesn't take a ton.
Right. There's some satisfaction in taking down those trees and building a house, building a home from them, and just the methodical nature of doing that and taking your time and then having, being able to start a garden, being able to hunt, being able to forage, all those things were something that we have within us. It's all in us. And again, back to that epigenetics, we have a background of overcoming hardships. Everybody does. And when I start going out in the forest and practicing some of these things and doing some woodworking skills, that's something I've just started recently. It doesn't feel like skill building as much as it does remembering.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like learning something new. It just feels like remembering something that has always been in me, like something's been woken up.
That's how I feel about reading Laura Ingalls. Is she was a little girl I used to play with. It feels very like I've heard this story before. And of course I grew up watching it, but it feels so familiar.
Yeah, familiar. That's a good term for it.
I love it though. It's just, yeah, I like secretly hope that I'm like Laura and I get to write about fun stuff when I'm older that is important or like that stands out to the kids. And then they're doing something like this about what you and I did that they find wild or worth sharing.
Yeah. I think that's all in us, Mandy.
For sure.
So many of us are uncomfortable being in the wild, but once we start setting foot in it, we start remembering, oh yeah, all we really need is water and wood, and somehow we can get by. And those things start feeling more like memories, I think. I think that is all in us. At least that's been my experience, my personal life, and then awakening those things in others as well. We catch on fast. Learning these skills isn't like the learning curve for these things is not high. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
And it comes back fast.
How are you getting into woodworking right now then?
I wanted to build some gates for my yard to actually keep the deer out of it. And so that was one of my main motivations, was to build really pretty gates. And it took me forever to do it because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just learning as I went along. I didn't really have any mentors to show me how to do it. And so it just took a long, long time to build these gates and to figure out how to do it. But I really enjoyed it. Blessed. I was blessed with having the amount of time that I needed to actually explore it. And so that was a starting point. Then I also built little gift boxes for my family as well. Another little thing that I enjoyed doing was just focusing on one thing at a time. And today I'm going to build a box out of wood, and I'm going to craft the lumber and just do it.
Yeah.
And that, again, I think is something that I know science has shown over and over again that we humans are not good multitaskers. We are far more relaxed and steady when we focus on one task at a time. And when we start trying to multitask, do too many things, get bombarded with too much information, that's where we start feeling unsafe and anxious. And that's because we are hardwired to do things one thing at a time. Our ancestors, back as far as 1 million years ago, they focused on one thing. That was hunting. That was making an arrow. That was weaving some rope to make a mat or a basket, making a basket, or foraging for food. They did one thing at a time and did it really well and were really focused when they did it. And so that's how we evolved for 1 million years. And we are hardwired for that. So when we try to do other things, when we try to do multitask, we are actually fighting chemicals in our brains and in our bodies that are reacting to that. And that's why we get stressed out and anxious when we try to do too much at once, and we don't do it well. Study after study shows when we do one thing at a time, we do really well at it.
Right.
When we stay focused. But when we try to do too many things, those things that we're trying to do, we actually don't do as well on. So that's what I love about woodworking, getting back to woodworking, is I can just really focus on that. That's why I love ancestral skills too, is because when I'm foraging, I've got my pattern eye out and I'm looking for scanning the landscape, looking for these familiar patterns that will tell me if there's food or not. Or when I'm looking to build a fire or something like that, I'm looking for just the right stick for my bow to make the bow drill.
Yeah.
Just the right curve. And I can't focus on anything else. I can't listen to music or think about anything else when I'm doing that. It's just that one thing, and I find it so relaxing and so recharging. There's never been a time I wandered out in the woods and then came back after practicing these skills for anywhere from an hour to 5 hours and thought, wow, that was a complete waste of time. No, I come back just feeling all recharged and happy and ready to just enjoy. I'm just enjoying life.
Yeah, that's great, Fred. And I think I'm jealous, right? Like back in the day, if they're like, the only thing I have to do is butcher chickens today, they're not getting phone calls. They're not getting social media notifications. They're not getting all these interruptions that we're getting all day long. They just literally roll out of bed, set up, butcher their chickens. Like they just go about what they have to do, and they figure out what they have to do based on the need, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't even, I think they'd probably look at me like, why are you butchering all your chickens at once and then putting them in a freezer? They didn't have a freezer. They needed a meal. They'd go butcher a chicken. Like it was just, they were always around. It was on an as needed basis.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds romanticized and idealistic and simplistic, but it is. And I think there is a yearning for that in all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about that in your podcast, in your previous podcasts, is we are looking for that simplicity. We are yearning for a simpler way of life, something that is like what this podcast is named after, something more intentional.
Yeah.
Something that we can just really focus on and ground ourselves on, revolve our lives around. And if we can just focus on one thing at a time without all these other distractions and things tugging at us. Yeah, it sounds idealistic and romanticized, but for the majority of human existence, that is what we did. For 99% of our existence, that's how we lived. That's why we are who we are and why we've been so successful, is because we did that. And when I start practicing those skills, just doing one thing at a time, that's when everything just falls away and I get into that flow experience. And it's just a euphoric, wonderful experience.
I just chuckle because I'm like, people are probably listening to this washing the dishes or driving. And that's a great use of time. But then it's also, feel free to sit down and take a load off.
Yeah.
Grab something warm to drink and just snuggle up and just try to focus on this. Like for me, that is so hard to just literally shut everything off in my mind and just be like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and listen to this podcast. It feels inefficient.
And it feels indulgent.
Yeah.
That's another thing we don't give ourselves, is that gift of time to recharge ourselves. And we really need it in our society right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like the most overlooked part, right? But then you look at when we're getting sick and stuff, that we probably are getting sick because we're pushing too hard and we need to rest a little bit more.
Yeah.
Take a bath. Go for a walk in the woods.
Yeah. There was something when I went out to New Jersey and took a 3-week survival course from Tom Brown. He died recently, and I'm so sad about that. But he taught us the value of what he called a sit spot. Zhang Yang was another one that really promotes the sit spot. And it is so simple, Mandy. I am a lousy meditator. I've tried to meditate for years, but I'm just too squirmy and my joints don't quite work that way. And something about sitting for that long just doesn't work for my butt. And so meditation just hasn't worked no matter how much I've tried it. But the sit spot works so well, and it's so simple. Basically just find a place in a landscape. It can be your backyard, or it can be off someplace else. But ideally it's looking at some piece of nature and just sitting there and watching the world go by. Yeah. It's that simple. And I have learned so much from the sit spot in my landscape, in my backyard, just by observing nature. And I try to get out there once a day, at least for 5 minutes. That's all I try to do. But I am so forgiving of myself. And so a lot of self-compassion. If I miss it for a week or two, I'm like, whatever, I'll just pick it up again. And it's always just wonderful to just go out of my sit spot and just be for a while.
That's awesome.
And so for everybody out there who is a lousy meditator, try the sit spot and be very gentle on yourself. Find a comfortable spot wherever it is. It might even be inside. Look out the window and just watch what's going on. Just observe. And I think you'll be delighted to see what unfolds before you and what you learn from nature and about yourself.
You actually taught me about sit spots. Do you remember that?
I do not.
Yes.
Remind me.
When you were helping us with our landscape and what to plant and the natural playscapes, you said you need to make sure that you build in sit spots. And we have them. We have a sit spot by the chickens because it's just 2 lawn chairs essentially out there at all times that when you do chores and you just want to take a load off, it's right between the lilac bush and the chickens. And it's sit there so we can sit there and just look at the chickens.
Yeah.
And we have multiple places to sit in Fairy Forest. And we've got 2 chairs on the back side of the shop that overlook the garden area. Tom and our son were just sitting there in the sit spot watching me mow yesterday. And it was just good head time for me to mow the backyard. And he was just sitting there. If I'm going to be super honest, Fred, I remember mowing being like, is he really just going to sit there and watch me? And then I like took a couple passes and I'm like, yes, he deserves to sit there and watch me. Like, why wouldn't he be able to just sit there and watch me? What is programmed in me that's like, why is he not doing anything right now? And it's so obviously I didn't say anything because I was on the mower, but I went through all that in my head of just, it's okay to just sit. I'm sitting mowing. But I felt like I was doing something.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's such a cycle.
Yeah. Our society really values productivity.
Yes.
Yeah, they really do. And when I was graduating from high school, trying to decide what I wanted to be, I had a choice between, I was good at 3 things. I was really good at computers, computer programming. I was a fairly good artist. And I was great at role playing. I played Dungeons and Dragons. And so those were the 3 things that I did. And society told me pretty loud and clear which one was going to be my niche in society if I wanted to be a success. And so I went down the software development route. And for 30 years, I was a software developer and a computer geek and user experience designer, and it rewarded me really well.
Mm-hmm.
But about halfway through, the fun faded. And I really wanted to do something differently. And so now I'm blessed to be able to be doing something that's closer to the land, something that feels more valuable at this point in my life.
For sure.
But it was, getting back to your point, that was all about productivity and efficiency in the corporate world. That's what's really valued. And so we take that mindset and then project it onto everything else.
Yeah, it very deeply, right? That's a system. I don't know, Fred, I'm sitting here, we're holding our family memoirs and we're talking about all the problems of today. And I'm just like, what do you think our ancestors would tell us about us talking about this? Like, I feel like it would just be something so simple. Like, what do you think they would tell us right now?
I remember not my great grandma's words because I didn't know her that well, but I still think about my grandmother and how she grew up with a lot of hardship. She grew up in the Great Depression. And I asked her about that. I was old enough in my 30s and 40s to have her be around, and I was wise enough to just be really curious about how she grew up and how it was different from how I was growing up. And the scenarios she described sounded really hard. Like they didn't have much of anything. Again, it was the Great Depression. And she would say over and over again, it's just how it was. We didn't know any better. It's just how it was. And I think that is a testament to how little we really need as families and individuals, is that we can get by on so very little. And yet we are trained and taught to say we just need more and more and more. So I think our ancestors would say simplicity and family and friends is the way to really have a meaningful life.
Like just the entitlement that we feel or the injustices that we feel, like let it go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it is that simple for in our ancestors' minds, right? Just why? Why? It is what it is. Just leave it be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom in that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And letting other people be what they want to be as well.
Yeah.
Everybody is struggling with their own internal issues, and just like I am, just like you are, passing judgment over others is never going to get us where we want to go. Just let people be.
For sure.
I think that would be another thing that our ancestors would highly recommend and value.
So speaking of them, the Rohrets were hardy people. It is said that no one ever heard Wolfgang or any of the boys complain that they were sick, tired, hungry, or cold. The first winter on Old Man's Creek was a trying time. They lived mostly on frozen potatoes, which they obtained from a neighbor across the creek, in return for splitting rails. This reflects the Rohret philosophy of never complaining, taking it on the chin and coming back for more. It may be a rough, crude philosophy according to today's standards, 1964, but it takes courage, fortitude, stamina, and pure grit to see it through, but the Rohrets all seem to have it.
Yeah. Grit. Coming back for more. What do you think of that?
God, I'm like, yes, fortitude, stamina, pure grit for sure, but take it on the chin and come back for more. I feel so conflicted on this. There's that whole Iowa nice philosophy, which is really just like permission to be passive aggressive. It's not like there is Iowa nice, right? Because I think we are very neighborly. There are a lot of cities where there's just no concern for your neighbor, for helping others, for even smiling. I would say Iowa definitely does that. But like they love the water cooler talk. And there's a lot of passive aggressiveness that comes in Iowa nice. And so I don't love that. But the thing that I don't like about this passage, taking it on the chin and coming back for more, to me, that is how society feels. And the systems that we're in are like, just they're not designed for us.
I love the perseverance part. That part I like, right? Being able to just get through things. But yeah, this notion that we need to just deal with what's happening to us as if we have no control over it and just accept it and come back for more. That's the part that of that passage that doesn't really resonate with me either.
I feel that. I don't like that.
Can I read a passage?
Please,
from
yes.
My grandmother's memoir here. So she married at 16 years old.
Okay.
And her husband loved to move around. And so they were in a two-room cabin for a while, and then they moved around. And now they are headed to Idaho. They discovered that there might be some land there. And so they needed to travel from where they were. I think they were in close to Nevada or Northern California. I can't remember exactly where they were, but they needed to travel 200 miles in a covered wagon. And she was about 19 years old at this point and had her first child. And they were traveling up over this mountain. And it says here, her job was to walk out in front of the wagon and scout ahead and make sure there was nothing that needed to be avoided because this is a windy mountain road. Lots of potholes. And she said her husband had to stop every little ways as the horses just huffing and puffing. I walked on ahead. Up near the top, I met an old rattler on the road. He was a sassy one. He coiled and began to sing and run his tongue out at me. Got rocks as that's all there was to use. Plenty of those. I let him have it, one after another, until he was good and dead. I sure bombarded him. Her job was to stay ahead and get rid of the rattlers as they traveled 200 miles up over a mountain. And then I read on, she was 7 months pregnant at that time.
That's so awesome.
Again, with a hearty stock. And what was interesting is they traveled here, they traveled there for, I think, going on 3 or 4 years. They just went all over the place talking about staying in, at one point, they couldn't find a place to stay. And so they found a farmer that was gracious enough to let them stand on their land. And so they ended up just building like this platform. And they had this 10 by 12 tent. And he constructed the platform. And then above it, they stretched the tent out over it. That was their home for a year and a half. That's where they stayed.
Oh, my goodness.
And yeah, just crazy things like that. But what I found interesting is then, fast forward just a little ways, they got to that Idaho farm and decided to purchase it. And she writes, "Here is where I began the hardest part of my life." At that point on the farm, which I find fascinating because here she's been traveling everywhere, what I think would be extremely difficult.
Right.
And she said, now they settled down on a farm. And she says that was the hardest part. So for the 24 years, they tried to farm this land in Idaho. And during that time, when they first purchased it, it was really great land because it had produced a lot because the weather was well. It was really good. But then shortly after that, droughts started happening and it just got harder and harder to farm. And she just goes into depth as to how much she worked and what her days looked like. It was just really hard work.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know from farming, there's always work to be done and it's backbreaking work.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah.
But Tom, my husband, was just telling me that like the new workout craze is like to work like a construction worker.
Really?
Apparently. And we're like, does anybody know that construction workers actually, there's a lot of roles right now for laborers. Just go get a job being a construction laborer.
That's a great talent to have.
Yeah, there's a lot for that. Oh my gosh, Fred, I am loving this. Did you flip to another part where you wanted to read another passage?
There's a passage here where she talks about what life on the farm was like. And she says that her husband drove 4 horses on a grain binder. I'd take baby and buggy and the rest walk to the field. Put baby buggy under a big tractor umbrella. Charlie, her husband, had gotten someplace for shade for children. Children play around close and watch the baby, usually one in buggy. Then I'd shock wheat, oats, or barley, whichever was being cut. At 11 o'clock, I'd take the children, push buggy, walk quarter of a mile or so to the house, get dinner, and then back to the field. Same thing over until toward evening. Around 4:30, hike in again. Oh, so tired. A supper to get and chores to help do. Put little ones to bed, go help feed the hogs, milk cows. One year I plowed a 7-acre field with a gang plow, 6 horses, hitched 2 and 2. Was glad when that was done. Just that's how she describes what life on the farm was like.
Yeah, I feel her like, oh, so tired. Walking in to make supper and then no, you have to go out and do chores and all the things afterward.
Yeah. And then after living there on that farm for 10 years, she talks about how the house actually burned in the middle of February, 3 feet of snow on the ground. And that was an extreme hardship for them, just a moment in their life there that was really difficult. They actually moved into their garage. Neighbors brought them supplies and they insulated the garage, but then they lived in that garage, just a little 1-room garage with all these kids for 6 years until they were able to build another house. And that's what the conditions were like for my grandmother and her family growing up. So hard.
I get that though. I feel like sometimes we get into what we think are temporary situations and then all of a sudden like 5-6 years go by and you're like, how did that just happen? I didn't see that being that big of a blurb for me. Like, oh.
Yeah. I think in our society, we have all inherited epigenetically that ability to just overcome the fortitude that we have. And we as a society kind of value those survival shows, right? They're all over the place. I like watching them too. But rarely do we see these shows that value being at one with nature or at peace with who we are and saying, oh, we're settling here, we're going to stay put. We're going to become natives in this part of the land. Rarely do we see that. It's normally man against nature, right? And I think we've inherited that as a society. That is a well-worn path that our ancestors trod. And I think we are continuing to go down that path. We genetically inherited that. It's in our blood, but it's also in our myths and in our stories.
Yeah.
And I read that in my grandmother's stories as well. How that type of fortitude was valued to be able to survive all that hardship. We put our fist in the air and say, yeah, do it, as if there's no better way.
Right. Yeah, hardship, I think, is like the moral of the story with these is they're going to come. And I think that's part of life is hardships and overcoming them. And that gives us our character, overcoming hardship and strife.
It does. Yeah. I wish we had more stories about living in harmony with one another, more stories about living in harmony with nature.
Yeah.
That's what I wish we had more stories about.
I'm trying to bring them to light, Fred.
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about Germany.
Please do.
Okay, so I'm going to read straight out of the memoirs here. The name Wolfgang is an old family name and should not be permitted to die out. In old Germany, certain names were set apart for the use of nobility, and the use was forbidden to the peasantry and tradesmen. Wolfgang was one of these restricted names. The origin of the name has probably been lost in antiquity, though it appears to be of Frankish extraction, though it may have come down from Saint Wolfgang. The Franks were a Germanic tribe who set up the Frankish Empire in Germany in the 2nd century. The name Wolfgang has a meaning too. Wolf, meaning rough or stormy, and gang, meaning passage or way. A free translation in the slang of today would be tough going.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Wow.
what we're talking about.
It is. And so people were restricted from actually using
Yeah.
certain names.
Especially if you were a peasant or a tradesman. Like, you weren't allowed to name your kin that, apparently.
Huh.
But so, like,
yeah, rough going. That's what we were just talking about.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's interesting too is, unfortunately, I think Wolfgang was probably like this Wolfgang Rohret was probably the last time the name was actually used. But like my last episode, the one I recorded with Tom, was about how we call our family the Weber Wolf Pack, which is like a gang.
Yeah.
So I was like, I didn't know this at the time, but now like when I read this, I'm like, well, I haven't named like a child Wolfgang, but we have our wolf pack. And so it feels like honoring the family lineage of Wolfgang. You haven't died. We're talking about you today on the podcast, and we lovingly call our family the Weber Wolf Pack. And I love that.
Yeah, what a wonderful way
Isn't that
to honor
fun?
him. Yeah.
So the family's from Bavaria and the Bamberg area of Germany. And it just, I don't know. So I studied abroad in Spain. And when I was in Spain, I went to 22 countries on my own. Like, I studied abroad to see the world, not to necessarily go to classes. Because I felt like exploring was going to teach me more than sitting in a classroom, even in Spain. So I did that. And I ended up in Germany. I took a train from Prague to Frankfurt. Get to Frankfurt. It was a little more industrial than I thought. So I'm hanging out in Frankfurt. I think I was there for less than a day. And then I take a train from Frankfurt to Munich. And I spent the night in Munich. I did the Hofburghaus. I went and saw Dachau, which was a really sad day. And then I think it was that night, I'm at the hostel and I'm like calling my dad. And this is when you had to pay by minute for internet. And I'm like, Dad, can you fax me the family records? I want to try to find the family brewery while I'm here, because the Seelman side has a brewery in Bamberg. So all of a sudden, like, you're on per minute and then you're paying per page faxing, and like just stuff is coming out. And I stayed up all night poring over, like, where is the family brewery and how do I get there? And I deduced that in Munich, I had to take a train or take a bus to Bamberg. And then from Bamberg, I mean, I'm going out and going out and going out. And it's like the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like when people die. Like, they just are taken nowhere and they don't know the language and they have no idea. And the bus stops and he's like, Zettmansdorf, because that's the town that they were in. So I had to take this bus from Bamberg to Zettmansdorf, Germany. And I'm looking and it's like Cosgrove, Iowa, where the Seelmans are from here, which is like a street. And I'm like, oh my God, I can do, like, when do you come back? He's 4 hours. And I'm like, oh, do you just want to wait 5 minutes? And like, I'll just see. And he's no. And I get out and I'm thinking, I am straight up stranded here. And I look forward and it's the Seelman Brewery right there.
Wow.
Yes. And right next door is a house. And on the mailbox says Seelman. And the next house says Seelman. And I'm like, oh my God, I made it. And I'm like, but I'm completely by myself. Like, I have no one to take the picture with, like, for me, because my grandpa had a picture in front of the Seelman Brewery. And I just remember looking at that as a child being like, I want to go there. I want to see this brewery in our family.
Wow.
You know me, Fred, like, I'm not afraid of much. And I go knock on the first door that says Seelman. And our cousin Rudolph, my grandpa's cousin Rudolph, answers the door. I have no idea who this man is. And I know very little German. And I'm like, sprechen Sie English? And he looks me dead in the eyes and goes, are you from Iowa?
What?
And I'm like, yes, I am. And he goes, come here. I have to show you something. I walk into his kitchen and he shows me a binder of his trip to Iowa. And I am like 2 years old sitting on my dad's lap.
What?
Yes.
That is incredible.
He called in sick to work, showed me the brewery. There wasn't Facebook or anything like, how do I connect with him? It was just kind of like all very, I'm just going to do this today.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic adventure. You were
It was
basically
incredible.
faxed a treasure map
Yeah.
and then tried to figure out where the treasure was, found it through your perseverance and curiosity, and then was rewarded by the synchronicity. This guy answering the door saying, are you from Iowa?
Yes.
And then he's got a picture of you.
You can't.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And he gives me like a Sealman Brewery shirt and a Stein. And he ended up taking me to a church in Bamberg and like just spent the day with me. We went out for lunch and had some beers. And I remember taking the train back from Bamberg to Munich. And then I'm like, just in this state of, I can't believe that was even my day. That was just so wild and random. And in the hostel, everyone's explaining, oh, did you know that this is in Munich? And what'd you do today? I'm like, I met one of my ancestors. Like they own a brewery here. And it was way awesome. And that day has always imprinted me and just meant so much to me that Rudolph did that for me. And then my brother ended up studying abroad in Denmark years later. And he contacted me and goes, how do you get in contact with cousin Rudolph? And I remember Rudolph said something along the lines of, yeah, well, at least your brother like gave me a heads up instead of just showing up on my store. I'm like, well, at that point, social media was like a real thing, but that was so fun, Fred.
Wow. Mandy, why can't we have more stories like that in our lives? More adventures? Why do we take just the status quo of slogging through our day as the norm? Why don't we take adventures like that as being the norm? And when we don't have it, right? When we don't have those highlights, those synchronicities, why don't we say, well, something must be off because I'm not experiencing that type of joy, that type of synchronicity,
Right.
that type of surprise. But instead, we value or we seem to think that just slogging through every day and having our highlights being a good meal, which is fine. But wow, what if the norm was having more adventures
Right.
like that? That sounds like a wonderful life. I want more stories like that.
It was awesome. And going through it, right, I wasn't even really I don't think I thought on the bus until he opened the door and I realized I was in the middle of nowhere and had absolutely no idea where I was, how dangerous that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going there, I'm like, I'm going to do this. There was also I'm not going to meet my ancestors or find that brewery. Like that is happening. And it did. And it was incredible. And I had a handful of favorite days abroad, but that was definitely in the top 3 for me.
Wonderful.
It was really cool. Sorry, I had to talk about Germany and that experience because it just,
Of course.
I think it is part of bringing it to today, Fred. And just our grandparents, even our parents, if you're lucky enough to have great grandparents in your life, like they have these stories and they don't have to necessarily have a written document like we have in our hands to begin. They could just start by asking questions and collecting the stories or even tracing the rhythms of their own life. What is your story? Because it didn't start with you, but it can be shaped by you. So I would just invite you that if you don't have a leather-bound family history, just start by jotting stories down or things that you remember. You could be the one to start this document for your family. Have an ancestor journal. Oh my gosh. I'm just thinking, I just remembered the woman that started Missouri Star Quilt Company. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
No, not.
There's she's got an entire town that's like a quilting destination. Tom's grandma turned me onto this. And I read her book cover to cover. It was incredible. And she homeschooled her kids. And she talks about she had an ancestor like family tree up on her wall and she would make birthday cakes for anybody whose birthday it was in the family, like in her family line. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing to be able to be like, oh, today is like great grandpa Wolfgang's birthday. But then I was thinking like for the people that you actually know, like I have an Aunt Coco and she's known for deviled eggs. It's like, what if you made something that person was known for? on
To
their
honor her.
birthday.
Yeah.
Yes. And like
Yeah.
you could do this for your grandma. Like I did that for my grandma's birthday because she always had this Oreo jar. Like, and I would run in and grab an Oreo and she would be like, Mandy, you have to give me a hug before you can have an Oreo. But that Oreo jar, like, imprinted on me. And so on grandma's birthday last year, because she's passed, we just like the kids, Tom and I just gorged on a whole double stuffed pack of Oreos. We were like, I didn't make a birthday cake, but it was like a special thing for grandma. And then just sharing stories of grandma, just so the kids can hear some of her life and what she meant to me and just the lessons that she taught both me and my dad and all of those kids. I loved that. Sorry, I know that was a little random, but I just thought of that for Missouri Star Coal Company. And I thought that was just such an amazing way that she talked about honoring her ancestors daily.
Mm-hmm. And you're getting to what you value and what our ancestors valued and trying to focus on that. And I don't want listeners to think that we are suggesting that we must go back to hunting and gathering, that we must all be farmers. It's not about that. It's more about reflecting on what our ancestors did and what they really valued and how they lived. And that's what I love about focusing on ancestors in the past and how they focused on one thing at a time and bringing those into our lives now and saying, okay, in this life, in my life, what do I really value? How did my ancestors live? What have I inherited from them? How did they express their values when life was much more simple and focused? And how can I bring that into my life now? Because we all have those traits of our ancestors that we admire. We all have those stories of our ancestors that we admire. How can we take those stories and tease out those values and say, those values are still in me as well?
Yeah.
How can I express them right now?
I love that, Fred. That's so good. What we remember shapes what we become. And sometimes going forward means looking back first. And I feel like that's what we've done here today.
Thank you, Mandy.
I love it. Before we wrap up, I keep thinking about this African proverb. When an old man dies, a library burns to the ground. In so many ancestral cultures, oral tradition isn't just storytelling. It was education. It's how people pass down their ethics, their mistakes, their warnings, their wisdom. And the fact that you and I are both sitting here holding something so rare, actual written records of our families going back generations, feels sacred. Because most people don't have that. They're disconnected from not just their lineage, but from the way that stories used to be shared. You especially, Fred, you are a keeper of stories. You're a living library. And it makes me realize that if we don't pass these stories on, who will?
Yeah, we are storytellers. And the better we can get at telling our stories, whether it's personal stories or our ancestors' stories, the more we can start living by those stories that we value so much.
For sure. And if we don't ask the questions or listen, and if we don't tell the stories, then what gets lost?
Absolutely.
And I think right now we're seeing so much of that getting lost.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
Do you want to speak to some of that?
Well, we're relying more on technology to try to express ourselves. And that is not how we actually evolved. We evolved. 99% of who we are evolved literally sitting around campfires and talking with each other. Before there was writing, we told stories. That is what kept us alive. We are storytellers. And that's why when we look up at the stars, we have all the constellations. That's why we have all these myths and religions. Those are all stories. And we are awesome storytellers. And we are relying more and more on technology to tell our stories. But that is not how we actually want to hear them. They're much more effective when we tell them personally. It's difficult to argue with them or judge them because it's their own experience. And we are just meant to sit and listen to what their experience is and then tell them our own story. And in the social media world, things get so ugly so fast because we're not actually seeing that person in front of us and we're not actually seeing their expression. I can't remember what percentage of our language gets told, or I can't remember what percentage of our story gets told through body language, but scientifically it's been shown that a lot of that comes through in just how we express ourselves. But we don't get that in social media. We don't get that online. And so that's the part of the story that's really being lost. And that's what makes personal storytelling so valuable.
I completely agree. That's part of the reason that I have a series called Wildfire Roundtable.
Perfect.
They're meant to just be short episodes to give you something to think about and then start to tell stories on, to connect with your family. That's literally the entire reason that series exists, is to just get with your loved ones and do some oral storytelling. Think about things you haven't, or share some ideas. Tell some stories, have some laughs. Like, whether it is around a bonfire or the table or in the car. But I think the point is, Tom and I did something, and it was like, you have shoulder to shoulder time where you're just expected to like ride in the car with somebody, right? So a lot of times you're not necessarily going to be an active speaker during that time. We are sitting knee to knee. That's a time for talking, right? So creating these more knee to knee moments with each other versus shoulder to shoulder all the time.
Nice.
Yeah. Fred, thank you for walking this path with me. And thank you for sharing so much of your sacred family history.
It's a good one. It's a good story.
It's amazing.
Yours is too. I think we could sit here all day and just pour over more and more little snippets from our ancestors and talk about it.
We could. And I guess if they're interested in that, maybe we'll trade and do it again.
Yeah.
But thank you, Fred. Seriously, this whole conversation has been so fun. And I want to thank you, Wild One, for listening to this. If you're thinking, I don't have old journals or documents or a family crest, that's okay. Just start by asking a question, or writing down one story, or remembering something that shaped you and sharing it. Because your story didn't start with you, but it can be shaped by you. And maybe, just maybe, you are the living library that someone else has been waiting for. This has been Into the Known, a series where we reconnect with ancestral wisdom, oral stories, and rhythms that still live in our bones. Thank you for being here, really. Thank you for tuning into another episode, for thinking deeply, questioning boldly, and choosing to live with more intention, because that choice ripples. Want to dive deeper into today's episode? Head over to the show notes at wildlyintentional.com for links, Fred's information, and resources from today's episode. If this stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Reach out to someone in your family. Ask a question you've never asked. Share a story that shaped you. These conversations aren't just about the past. They're how we carry it forward. Because remembering where we come from might just change where we go next. What if building a home library wasn't about having more books, but about choosing the ones that shape our hearts, spark wonder, and reflect what your family stands for? Next week, Sarah, with A Sweet and Simple Home, will be joining me to talk about how to build a home library that reflects your values without breaking the bank. You're not going to want to miss it. This is Mandy, signing off. Until next time, stay rooted, be brave, and live wildly intentional.